2 years removed from drafting the next fancy icon at quarterback and the franchise star of the future, there's quarterback confusion in Indy this year. And to dig through the landscape when it comes to our redraft fantasy leagues, I have Pete of the JMD pod to talk all things Indianapolis Colts. And it'll be remiss of us not to start with Mr. Anthony Richardson himself. It's not looking great, is what I've got written down initially. So current ADP QB 28. That is mind-boggling when we think the hype we had from him just a couple of years ago. And that could still be too high. That's going undrafted in most 1 QB leagues. And even in Superflex, he might well be a third.
Yeah, I think I think that could still get lower before the season kicks off as well, because I think the closer we get to the start of the season, I think we'll realise he's not the starter. That doesn't mean he's not going to play games, but I think the shoulder problems he was having in OTAs and stuff is not a good sign for him, considering the injuries he's had the last couple of years.
Is missed minicamp because of that? So that's obviously given Danny Dimes, we'll talk about shortly, the chance to get a stranglehold. Well, as tight to stranglehold as Danny Jones can get on anything. Going into that. There's so many just question marks. Says missing minicamp. There's a shoulder injury. He got tired in a game last year and has to be removed. That blows my mind in any sport. You don't ask to come off unless you're like 13. You're having a horrible game of rugby in the snow.
No.
Over 2 seasons as well, we've only got 13.9% of games where he's been a QB1, and that rushing upside has got him there. The passing work's been abysmal for fantasy. It's just not what we expected at all, is it? I don't see it getting any better.
No, I think there's been a lot said when you go back and look at his college, the amount of games he played in college and the amount of games he played even before college. He just doesn't have the games in him and that was always the worry when we drafted him. But the last couple of years, it's just been stop-start the whole time. But even when he's been in there, the tiredness thing was a real worry. The couple of the Colts podcasts that I listen to, you hear things that the senior players around there are having to tell him what to do, and there's no sort of like drive for him to get in early. It's like everything you're hearing beyond the injury stuff, everything you're hearing is not a good sign for him. So it'd be interesting. I think we'll go on to Daniel Jones, but I think Daniel Jones has positioned himself as QB1 for the start of the season, and I think it's going to be his job to lose in training camp. But I think that might be the best thing for Richardson. I think even if he's healthy, he needs 10, 12 weeks sat behind someone else. And if he gets an opportunity, then maybe he can learn and then come in and try and take it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when we're thinking from a fantasy perspective, but you only get the fantasy points if you're on the field in the first place. And it's right, it's those intangibles, especially around quarterbacks. You'd never hear or have ever heard anything about the attitude or people questioning Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes.
No.
You don't even hear about Baker Mayfield anymore. Yeah, so it is a worry, isn't it? I agree with you, though. I think, and I said this before the injury as well, that Daniel Jones looks the more likely starter. He looks, if you had to draft a Colts, I don't know what situation you'd make yourself do. If you really had to, you'd probably go for Daniel Jones. But his ADP is currently QB 33. So actually, more people, not many, say they're outside the top 24, are confident in Richardson at this point. He just feels like the more probable starter. And my question for Daniel Jones is, how much of the poor play we saw from Daniel Jones was Giants related? We saw Saquon was brilliant at the Giants and then went on to exceptional things as soon as he got out. But at the same time, is Indianapolis the place to put that behind him?
Possibly. I think the longer the off season's gone on, the more positive I've got about Daniel Jones. But obviously, I knew I was coming on here, so you start doing a little bit of checking the stats from previous years. And even when he had that, his best season so far was stats wise, if we're talking fantasy football, was not great. There was a lot of rushing. I think he rushed for 700 and odd yards, and 7 touchdowns in that year. And so maybe if he can get back to doing that, but we'll go on to talk about the running back, who's obviously the star of the team. I just don't see him scoring that many touchdowns, and he doesn't throw a lot of touchdowns. It's like, I think Shane Steichen's a great coach, and I think he will get something out of him. I just don't know if it's, and I think it will be enough for us as Colts fans to kind of go, yes, we're a decent side and we can compete in this division. I just don't see it from a fantasy football, definitely not a redraft point of view. I enjoyed taking him. He was like an afterthought in best ball a couple of months ago, and I was taking him as like 20th pick and a lot of best balls. And now it's obvious he's going to be QB1. He started moving up there a little bit, but outside of best ball, when you might get the odd 1 or 2 good games where he rushes for a touchdown and throws for a touchdown, I wouldn't be touching either of our quarterbacks.
No, I mean, I've got them both down as being high risk streaming QBs. I think that Daniel Jones is slightly lower risk, but still in that high risk bracket. I just think that his absolute ceiling feels now to be around QB 18 to 22 max. But if he ends up settling around the QB 14, I don't expect it to happen, but it's also not a huge shock. That consistency is the thing as well. Like you said, you look at these QB 1 to 12 weeks over the last 3 years, 22.2%. It's the top 24 finishes, 75.9%. He rarely has complete stinkers, but when he does, they are proper stinkers is the problem, isn't it? Super flex, stash him, 1 QB, watch the waiver wire in case it works out all right for him. I think is as optimistic as we can be.
We've got Jags at home in week 17, so somebody will be picking him up to play in their championship game because they're desperate. So, and I pray for those,
isn't it?
I pray for those people. So good luck with that.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to in the Bills week 17 having him as a plug and play QB for a championship winning experience. That will have, if you've got there relying on that, all the best to you.
You never know. In a year's time, it might be loads of people walking around in Daniel Jones Colt shirts because they were just so pleased that he won them a title. But I can't see it.
Well, Sam Darnold wasn't going to do anything last year, and look what happened. I said he wasn't going to do anything, and he kept doing things over and over and over again. Moving on, though, to someone that we've seen some stellar fantasy seasons from, even last season. So I feel last season people feel it was a bad season because he was drafted as RB6 and ended up as RB12. It still wasn't a bad season, just wasn't what people had hoped for. It just feels a long way away from those days kind of after his first season where we thought he was nailed on to at some point be the RB1 overall at some point. His numbers are deceiving from last year, though. I will say that. So you look at the last 3 games. Week 16, he was RB1 with 39.8 points. Week 17, he was RB1 with 27.6 points. Week 18, he was RB5 with 25 points. He scored 38% of all of his fantasy points in 3 weeks. He did miss time, but still ended up as RB12 as well. We know he still has it. We've seen he still has it. He could be a real value. I just don't trust that inconsistency at quarterback in Indy and what we've seen so far. I think he'll still get it done, but are we going to get to those top heights again?
I think he could be sneaky good this year in terms of, I mean, his general ADP is around 10 to 12. I think he's got an opportunity to outdo that. Can he be the RB1? Probably not anymore. Depends on what format you play, obviously. But I don't think he's got that sort of ceiling. I just don't think we're that sort of team. But I think Richardson stifled him a bit last year. I don't think he works well in that sort of offense. I think we've seen Daniel Jones work well with Saquon Barkley in the past, and I think they can get, ever since Daniel Jones has been seen as sort of QB1, and if that continues and he does start the season, I would be a lot higher on Jonathan Taylor than I would be if it was Anthony Richardson. And I can just see Shane Steichen, as he did at the end of last year, kind of going, right, the offense runs through Jonathan Taylor, and then we'll get onto the wide receivers in a minute, but we'll use the wide receivers where we can, depending on what game scripts and all that sort of stuff. But primarily, Jonathan Taylor's the man. We've got a couple of new faces on the offensive line, so a lot of it will come down to how good they are and in replacing some good guys that moved on from last year. But I've always liked Jonathan Taylor. I think he's got I think he's got good potential. He's a really solid running back, and if you start your draft with a couple of wide receivers and you are looking for a running back, I think he's not a bad choice to have as your first running back off the board.
Yeah, so he's currently available at the round 2-3 turn, and I'm inclined to agree with you. Where he's going, I don't see him falling much below that. I see it more probable he ended up as RB 6-7 than 14-15, if I'm completely honest. The one thing that does, because I don't like to get bogged down too much by the injury prone tag we see. I think for me, the concern with Taylor is 16 games over 3 seasons with recurring ankle injuries. That is a slight concern, but any running back you draft at any point could miss the entire season because something that happens in training camp. You can't really factor that in too much. Couple of stats for concern as well, though. So last season, there were 46 running backs who had 100 or more carries. Taylor was 42nd in forced missed tackle rate and 44th in yards after contact. That is of a little bit more concern. How much of that is O-line related, in your opinion?
I mean, the O-line wasn't too bad, but that's a little bit worrying. I think he did get going towards the end of the year. I think he had injuries. He had injuries across the year, so you can put a little bit of that down to injury, I think. But he's still young enough, and I think the fact that he finished the season strongly would allay my fears a little bit. That he's probably got. I mean, some people will point to the teams we were playing at the end of the year, but he's still going to get the job done, and he did. So I think he's a strong choice for 2025.
RB2 on the depth chart currently is Khalil Herbert, but I think that actually when we get into the season, it will more likely be the new rookie in Indianapolis, who is DJ Giddens. Now, round 5 draft capital, no, it doesn't fill you with huge optimism, but his elusiveness, his yards after the contact ability make him an interesting target to watch. I don't think there's much value for him as an RB2 whilst Taylor is fit and playing. I do think he is a player that we'll be very interested in on those games that Taylor misses, if he misses them. And he's one that's interesting to watch, especially when you look at the numbers he put up last year as well. I find him an interesting one. I don't think he'll be drafted. I will be watching on the waiver wire and seeing if a role emerges. What are your thoughts going into the season on DJ Giddens?
Similar to what you've just said, I think I'm not in on Khalil Herbert. I don't think there's anything there. I mean, the Bengals brought him in for a few games last year, and I think he fumbled with his first touch and never saw the field or didn't see the field for the next couple of games. So they had nothing. They didn't want much to do with him. I think Khalil Herbert's time to prove he's a star in the NFL has long gone. So he's not going to be somebody you're looking at in fantasy. Hopefully, DJ can sort of show that he's at least second choice behind Jonathan Taylor, and then, as you put on there, watch the waiver wire, because if Jonathan Taylor does happen to miss a game, I'm sure he'll be top 3 choice that week to bring in and take the gamble on him, because I think the ceiling is there in that you don't know what might happen with him. He's got the stats from college. He's got the potential. It's just whether he can actually do it in the NFL.
Before we move on to wide receiver, please do take a moment to subscribe, give us a like and share as well. And when you finish this video, go and check out one of the other 31 deep dive shows we have put together as we look at every single NFL team and their potential impact on your 2025 redraft rosters. We move on to wide receiver, though, and we move on to Michael Pittman, who is another player that it's been a bit of a roller coaster for fantasy for Michael Pittman over the last few years. Just one top 12 week and 4 top 24 weeks in 2024 as he finished up the wide receiver 41. In 2021, he was wide receiver 17, 2022 wide receiver 20, 2023 wide receiver 13. It seemed like it was finally kind of settling in. It's the quarterback situation, isn't it, that really scuppers out. Who'd have thought his best season would have been with Joe Flacco?
Yeah, there's a lot of players saying that in the NFL recently.
To be fair, actually, who'd have thought quite a lot? Yeah, you're right, quite a lot of wide receivers who are happy that their quarterback gets injured.
Yeah, there was a point last season where Pittman was reportedly about to go on IR, and then Richardson got injured, and they were bringing Flacco in, and suddenly Pittman was playing on Sunday. So it's like, hang on a minute, you were going to miss at least 4 games. So I think that tells you what he thinks of Richardson. I mean, when you've got a quarterback who barely completes 50% of his passes, that's got to be frustrating as a wide receiver. I think I've likened our wide receiver room to a poor man's Green Bay Packers, in that I think we've got 4 or 5 options. You're not really sure who the best one is, and none of them seem to be as good as the ones that the Packers are messing about with. So I've always been a fan of Pittman. I think in a different team, he would be a better player. I think he's just been frustrated by the quality of the players around him and the service he's getting. This season, though, it's hard. It's just hard to pick him, I think. I think there's other wide receivers in and around. We're going to go and talk about one of the others, because I think he's about the same. It just feels like a little bit more of a gamble with, a potential higher ceiling, whereas Pittman feels like the sort of player who's going to get you 5 catches for 50 yards on a sort of regular basis, and there's just no big boom game in there. So it's not, as much as I love the guy, and I think he's been a solid wide receiver for us from a fantasy point of view, I just don't see anything special in his future, unfortunately.
No, 4 weeks at 5 or fewer points last year when he was drafted as the wide receiver 21, according to ADP, it makes him a relative bust. He's now being drafted as a flex wide receiver, so going around wide receiver 50, and that feels fair. I think if you've got him as your first wide receiver on the bench or your second flex spot, that's sort of the best you can hope for there, really. I was surprised to see that a player we're about to speak about was slightly above him on the ADP. So he's at 50 and Josh Downs at 48. As someone who's obviously far more plugged into the Colts, does that come as a surprise to you or not?
Not really, no. I've seen Josh Downs is getting a lot more buzz than Pittman is, and I think it's just that he showed flashes of, I don't want to use the word greatness because that's massively overhead it, but he showed flashes of like brilliance last year when in certain games, and I think, I mean, honestly, it could well be any one of these 4 guys. And we've talked about Daniel Jones. His best year, he threw for 3,200 yards. So he's barely managing 200 yards a game. And this is where I kind of think, if you are drafting a Colts wide receiver, you should only be doing it as a gamble to see, is there a ceiling there? Leave him on the bench for a couple of weeks and see if, Daniel Jones has got a favorite. Alec Pierce seemed to be Richardson's favorite. Adonai Mitchell was so close to about 3 absolute bomb touchdowns last year, but Richardson couldn't connect with them. But Josh Downs is the one that seems to be getting a bit of buzz from the sort of local reporters in terms of the Colts, in terms of what he could potentially be the wide receiver 1 moving forward. But even at that, even with that statement, I don't know what that means in terms of fantasy. I don't even know if a top 30 wide receiver seasons in his ability, because of the quarterback play, because of the team around him. And I just don't think there's going to be enough volume there to make any of them that relevant. Going back to what we said about the quarterbacks, it'll be flex plays off the waiver wire, maybe not off the waiver wire, but people you've got stashed on your bench. Could Josh Downs do a job? Yes, but he's going to be, Pittman's I think to sum it up, he'll get you 5 for 50. Josh Downs has got the big games in him, but he's also fully capable of completely disappearing the next week. So you're riding a roller coaster if you take him.
And you're right with that statement he's saying about if he's being touted as the wide receiver 1, because being the wide receiver on your team is not equal to being the wide receiver 1 on a different team. Being the Colts wide receiver 1 is not the same as being the Bengals wide receiver 1. It just isn't, is it? And I think there'll be a lot of spreading of the fantasy points, and it's knowing where they're going to go. I don't think that Jones or Richardson can sustain 1 consistently fantasy relevant wide receiver, let alone 2, let alone 4, as we've kind of looked at on the screen. We know that Alec Pierce is going to catch 2 or 3 absolute highlight reel catches at some point. Just looking back at Alec Pierce's stats last year, and up and down doesn't really do it justice. Start the year. So from week 1 to week 5, he was wide receiver 10, then 20, then 70, then 98, then 11.
Yeah.
He's got 4 top 12 weeks in him. He's got the same number of top 12 weeks as Michael Pittman, but he's also got 2 weeks outside of the top 100. So Alec Pierce, someone's going to plug him in at the right time in DFS, and it will win him some money on fantasy game day. The rest of the time, you've got no idea, have you?
No, but that's it. You talk about it's Josh Downs or Pittman for me. I would lean Josh Downs, but when you look back on last year, Pierce ended up with more yards than both of them and more touchdowns than both of them. But as you just pointed out, it was all over the place. So I think it's going to be a little bit like that with all of them. I kind of think he's going to use them and this is why I use the Packers as the comparison. Is I think it's the same problem there, though. It's who they use from 1 week to the next.
However, I do have an answer to the question, which Colts receiver should you draft? And the answer to that question is Tyler Warren. I love Tyler Warren, as so many people did pre-draft as well. I think if you have 2 quarterbacks where you have significant concerns about their ability to hit a barn door from 10 yards, what you should do is draft a tight end who is the size of a barn door, and you're going to pass to him closer than 10 yards. He is surely going to be fun and times. We've always said the fancy trope that a rookie quarterback's best friend is his tight end. I think we've said on our show a few times before, a bad quarterback's best friend is also his tight end. Confident physical runner, really diverse player, safe hands, great in contested catches. Let's be honest, if you're receiving balls from Richardson or Jones, a lot of those are going to be in contested catch positions. He's 6'4", 115 kilograms. What a massive man to be throwing the ball to when you're not especially accurate.
Yeah, I think I was excited about this draft pick. We were linked with Bowers last year, and Turner obviously never got as far as us anyway. But there was a lot of talk about it feels like every year there's been a lot of talk about us taking a tight end high in the draft, if not in the first round. And then when Colston Loveland went at 10, I was a bit like, oh, that's interesting, because Tyler Warren was always the one that was punted as the highest tight end on the board. And then to get him at 14, I thought was a really good pick for us, and exactly as you just touched on, exactly what we need. And I think he is the main reason why most of those wide receivers are not going to really be relevant, because I think the offense will run through Jonathan Taylor, and then when we need a few more yards, I think he will be the safety blanket that Daniel Jones goes to a lot of the time. And I think they're how big that breakout will be in year 1. I mean, I've just mentioned Brock Bowers. I'm not potentially comparing him to Brock Bowers. That would be a hell of a lot. But I think there's potential for him to be a really usable tight end in his rookie season. And I think between him and Taylor, I think most of the yards and the touches and the touchdowns are going to come from those two.
I do think in many leagues, Warren and Loveland are going to get overdrafted because of Laporta and then Bowers over the last couple of years. Rookie tight ends are notoriously really difficult to call as far as year 1 fantasy output goes. The comparison with Brock Bowers, I do feel there's one area that is a valid comparison. Would you say that Richardson and Jones as a duo are much worse than Minshew and O'Connell?
I don't think he can be much worse than Minshew and O'Connell. So
yeah, Brock Bowers got it done, and they're very different players. We know this, but Brock Bowers put up big numbers with 2 poor quarterbacks. It's not impossible for Tyler Warren. I put potential year 1 breakout. I genuinely don't quite know where to put him. If I was in the business of drafting a couple of tight ends, if I went later and I wanted to go for a backup, I think I'd take Warren because he's got a chance of being a weekly play. If I was going for just one tight end on my lineup, that's a bit of a gamble that is too much for me, I think. I'd want to have someone else in there just in case, even for the first 3 or 4 weeks, as you see, if the role emerges.
Yeah, well, when I checked ADP, I think I don't know if you got him. I've got him at 11, which feels a bit high for someone you're taking a bit of a gamble on. But
no, I agree.
That said, I think if you I mean, we talked on the previous show you had me on when we were doing the redraft. I was like, I'm after one of those top 3 guys. And if you don't get one of those top 3 guys, I think I would much rather wait and gamble on leave it till late, gamble on someone like a Warren and then back him up with, someone a bit further down, than taking one of the middle guys that probably aren't, like an Njoku that's probably not going to get it done week in, week out anyway. So you might as well gamble on a bit of a breakout a little bit later in the draft. So I think he's definitely worth a gamble, and he will get drafted in pretty much all drafts. It's just I think you might have to stick with him for a couple of weeks, because I don't think it'll be straight from week 1. But he's definitely got potential. Like I say, Daniel Jones is going to need a favourite target, and he is the biggest thing we've got, literally. So,
well, other than Mo Ali Cox, maybe.
Yes, that's true. No one's as big as Mo Ali Cox.
No. I agree, though. So I do think tight end 11 is a little bit too high. I've got him down ranked as tight end 14 because I think that probably start of the season, it'll be around that tight end 18 to 24. So around the end of the season, I think he could be getting tight end 6 to 10 weeks in there as well, maybe. But yeah, certainly a player. He's in that mix of players. I'm really excited to see what happens with him over the course of the season. Speaking of excited for the season, are you excited for what is in store for the Colts this season, or are you thinking that they're a nice high pick in the draft next year is what is destined?
So, anyone who listens to our pod will tell you that a few months ago I tried to take a sabbatical from the Colts because I was like, I can't be doing with this. If Richardson and Jones is all we've got to offer, I think maybe I want a year off, but they dragged me back in, and I was doing a bit of research for the show, making sure I knew what I was talking about. And I'll tell you what, when you look at the start for next season is really important for us. We start with 2 home games. We've got Dolphins and Broncos. We need to win one of them. Then we're at the Titans. So ideally we need to win 2 of those first 3. But generally the schedule's not too bad. We're not in the worst division, obviously, in terms of, having to compete. I think the Texans are better than we are, but we were 2 games back from the Texans last year and lost both of the head-to-heads by less than 4 points. So, and that was, I think the squad that we've got now is in a better place than it was then. So I think if we can grab one of those games off the Texans, maybe go 4-2 in division, then there's enough games there that I feel like we could potentially have a run at this division and therefore a run at the playoffs. I think the AFC is stronger than the NFC, so I don't think the second place team in the AFC South is making the playoffs when you look at how strong the North is and the West. But I do think that we're third favourites behind the Jags, apparently, according to the bookies. But I do think that we've got a very good, if we can start strong enough, I do think we've got a chance of taking the Texans most of the way. And then week 18 at the Texans could all come down to that.
I think one good thing from a fantasy point of view is that if the Colts do have a good season, that surely means that Warren and Taylor have had great fantasy seasons as well. That would be the most likely outcome, wouldn't it? Well, amazing. Thank you very much for your time, as always, Pete.
Pleasure.
If people want to get involved with you and the rest of the team, where can they find you?
On our socials at JMD Pod and on YouTube at Jefferson My Drinks Podcast.
Brilliant. So we'll pop some links down in the comments below. So please do make sure you get involved. Thank you very much, Pete. As always, it is goodbye from me. It's goodbye from Pete. And to finish us off, as always, Malcolm, take us home.
You have been listening to Pestle and Ed of TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Instagram and Twitter.